Everybody enjoys a good love story. Just think of all the classics: Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, Titanic, Your Lie in April. All classic romance stories throughout time with definitely no other correlation to each other. These are all stories I am personally a fan of to some extent, largely due to my own enjoyment of the romance genre and all the ways that it can be played out. And because of this, I'm always hungry for more romance anime to watch. But the anime landscape is constantly in flux, with different trends fading in and out of popularity. Everyone remembers the huge surge in isekai anime and more or less simultaneous decline of the mecha genre that both marked the early 2010s. But another trend that I haven't really seen much talk about has been the recent rise in relevance of the romance genre. Now, it's not like romance wasn't a thing or even popular in the past, obviously. You can find romance anime performing well pretty consistently, going back as far as seasons have even been a thing in anime, but recently it's been topping the charts a whole lot more than it ever had in the past, which is something I find interesting. And when you really look at it, there's not only a higher quantity of romance anime coming out, but also a higher overall quality as well. I mean, just look at the season that just ended, and you'll see that romance anime took up a solid chunk of all the premiere slots for the season. This is a pretty notable uptick over just a few years ago even. You'd maybe get one or two romance anime in a season worth mentioning, and sometimes they'd hit it big and make it into the more like mainstream anime conversation. But even then, half the time it wasn't always for how good it was, and was sometimes for just how weird or out there they were, let's say. And your first thought now is probably, well, no shit, Mr. Video Dude. Lock the weebs up inside for a while thanks to the big cough, and they're gonna get desperate for those feels. But that statement would be made under the assumption that one, weebs could even be more desperate than their standard state, and two, that there were previously weebs actually going outside and then actively interacting with other people romantically or otherwise. With that nonsense out of your head, I'm sure you're struggling to come up with any other reason why these shows might be seeing such success in recent years. But don't you worry your technically functioning little head. I have all the answers, or at least enough ideas to fill out a video with. So if we do want to look at where this trend might have really picked up, then we have to go back to when I at least first started to notice it, back in a simpler time, around like 2018, 2019. It's not like all of a sudden romance was one of the biggest genres in the landscape. It built up over time to where we are now. And again, it's not at all that it wasn't already doing well. You can find seasons here or there that were dominated by romance, but when you look at them and their overall cut through and success, it's not at all to the point that we're getting to now. 2018 started with some great romance titles like Master Teaser Takagi-san and Love is Hard for Otaku, and ended the year with Rascal Does Not Dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, and all these were fantastic and did really well. But the year as a whole had more, let's say, divisive shows getting a lot of the attention online, like Citrus or After the Rain. And while these aren't the worst offenders in that category by any means, other greats like Bloom Into You and Boarding School Juliet weren't able to catch nearly as much traction as they deserved. With 2018 ending so strong, 2019 immediately took off running. The first season of the year had both Kaguya-sama Love is War and Quintessential Quintuplets, which both absolutely crushed it in viewerships, rating, and importantly, money for the people behind them. You can't go into any shop in Japan without seeing the quints plastered all over everything, even now, which is years after the manga has concluded. And Love is War in particular, I think, is interesting to note because it was really the first show to see as much success as it did while it was airing and not in retrospect, like a lot of the older beloved romance shows did, and arguably was and is one of the largest and most successful romance series ever. When the first season aired, not only did the manga become the single best selling in all of Japan for a while, but the first season of the anime is also among the top rated and most popular anime of all time, especially out of romance, with each season doing better than the last, with the most recent one being currently, at least, the highest rated anime of all time. And yeah, it probably doesn't deserve that slot exactly, and it's extremely unlikely that it holds it for any real amount of time, but I also can't say that the score that it's sitting at on Mal isn't accurate. The following spring 2019 season, we had the Fruits Basket remake and We Never Learn, both performing similarly well to the previously mentioned two, with the rest of the year having other bangers like Beastars or the second season of Takagi-san. Which isn't to say that it didn't also have some weird shit tainting the water a little, when stuff like Why Are You Here, Teacher, MILF Sekai, Magic Senpai, and worst of all, Domestic Girlfriend, all coming out that same year. But along with them were so many other great romance anime performing at the same level as those, and importantly, they were able to gather at least a good chunk of a fan base. This meant that at the end of 2019, a solid chunk of the most talked about shows and a huge chunk of the biggest earners in the year had been from the romance scene. And it had been the actually quality shows that had been performing this well, unlike in the past where shows like MILF Sekai would probably have been the bigger earners. And higher ups clearly noticed this, because it wasn't long before every season started having the romance tag appear more than a couple of times in the upper ranks of their currently airing section. Now, I want to show you something to kind of illustrate what I'm saying here and what like the whole point of me making this video is, because I remember back in the day there was a meme that you'd see circling around every now and then. This meme was the 4 horsewomen of no anime, which features the art of 4 different girls from 4 different manga that each have very dedicated fan bases, and at the time of the meme being made at least, had gone years with not even like a mention of a possibility of an anime adaptation. And at the time, a lot of us thought that it was kind of going to be an indefinite thing. The 4 women in the meme were Komi-san, Anjo-san, Nagatoro-san, and Mizuno-san, which were from Komi-san Can't Communicate, The Mischievous Gal Anjo-san, Please Don't Bully Me Nagatoro-san, and The Girl with Senpaku Eyes, respectively. These manga had a very wide spread of popularity, with Komi-san being the largest by far, and The Girl with Senpaku Eyes being easily the most unknown. But they all had really dedicated fans nonetheless, who all really wanted to see them get animated. I should also note here that another version of this meme went around a bit, where Maureen from My Dress Up Darling was used in place of either Komi or Mizuno, but that's not super relevant. And all these were manga that I did and still do absolutely love. Nagatoro-san is what I'd say is the manga that really got me into reading romance manga in the first place, and Anjo-san is probably the one that I'm still on the edge of my seat to read every single new chapter whenever it drops. I bring up this meme because it was getting shared for years, but if you look at these properties now, Komi-san has 2 seasons at this point, and Nagatoro-san is about to get its second. That, mixed with the hopeful rumors that Anjo-san will be getting an adaptation here in the near future, and the fact that it is so well positioned to get one, might mean that this meme could be completely irrelevant in a couple years. I mean, hell, with the announcement that Tomo-chan as a Girl is getting an anime adaptation soon, and the fact that that series and The Girl with Senpaku Eyes have more than a few similarities, and that The Girl with Senpaku Eyes has finally been getting an official English translation published, it means that the possibility of even The Girl with Senpaku Eyes eventually seeing an anime adaptation could be a possibility soon. But the one downside of an adaptation-based medium like anime is that there can be such thing as too much of a good thing, at least in a given time frame. Look at Marvel's MCU movies. While only loosely based on the comics, it was very clear that by a certain point they had used up most of the best characters and storylines that they had at their disposal, and things took a turn for the worse when they started pushing worse storylines, or just ones and characters that didn't really translate well to the big screen. So obviously we want more and more to get adapted, but something I have noticed as a fairly avid manga reader, especially when it comes to rom-coms, is that by comparison, there have been less new, worthwhile romance series starting serialization than there have been of them being adapted. So, hypothetically, what happens when too many of these highly anticipated manga have been adapted? The one thing that kind of worries me, I guess, is that in a year or two maybe, almost all of the best romance manga out right now might have been adapted, and they could have to default to just doing lower quality material, or they could slow down the release of these shows down to a crawl. This is something that some people are talking about already being a thing with the isekai genre, where most of the best has already been adapted, and now it's mostly sequels or lackluster releases nowadays. But that's not exactly true either. There have been plenty of absolutely amazing isekai series coming out, and there are still more that people are super excited to see in the future. And luckily, unlike the world of comics, new and original series are coming out all of the time by a huge variety of authors and publishers. So the alternative and much brighter possibility here is that in a couple of years' time, instead of less material, the increase in popularity and in turn likelihood of success will draw more young and talented artists and authors into giving us their own take on a romance story that will then continue to fuel the fires of this trend for years to come. And in reference to what I mentioned earlier with isekai, that's kind of what we've been seeing there. Tons of new series popping up, and a lot of them turning out to be a lot of fun, with plenty of bangers still waiting for the chance to be adapted, even now a decade into its rise to hyper relevance. So, do I think this wave of romance anime is a bad thing? No, not at all. I couldn't be happier about it, and I hope it continues because I love so many of these series. And it's easily the genre that the most people thank me for recommending and pushing them into watching, because there are just so many amazing stories out there, and I know that quite a few of the upcoming adaptations are going to continue to crush it. So there really isn't a moral to this story or anything. I just kind of wanted an excuse to talk about something that's been on my mind recently. But not only are there loads of great romance anime coming up, but lots of other amazing shows too, and I have opinions on all of them. So make sure to subscribe and check back in so I can continue to tell you what the right and wrong opinions to have on these are. And trust me, I've got some opinions brewing.